Tango didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just sat there, motionless, ears pricked, amber eyes frozen on the rusted steel door of the old Harrow Mill paper factory. Snow drifted lightly across the cracked sidewalk, catching in the shepherd's thick coat. The building loomed behind him like a ghost of the town's past, its broken windows long since boarded, its smokestacks reaching into the gray Minnesota sky like arms that had given up trying. Officer Nina Alvarez had just ended her shift. She was halfway through a cup of gas station coffee, windows rolled up, heater humming low, when she spotted the dog out of the corner of her eye. She slowed, blinked. He didn't move. She pulled the cruiser over to the curb and sat for a second, engine idling. "You lost, buddy," she muttered. No tag, no collar. Just that unwavering gaze locked on the door like it owed him something. Nina killed the engine and stepped out. The cold slapped her face immediately, sharp and biting. She zipped her jacket, her boots crunching on a thin layer of ice as she walked across the road. Tango didn't turn, didn't even twitch. The factory had been shut down for almost 20 years, a place teens used for dares and photographers crept into for gritty backdrops. But no one came here in the mornings. No one stayed this still. She crouched a few feet from him. "What do you see?" The dog gave her a brief glance, then went right back to staring. His body was tense, not anxious, controlled, waiting. Nina had seen this before, in a different life, back when Tango still wore a harness with the words "Search and Rescue" stitched in faded thread. She knew the signs, the set of the shoulders, the way he breathed, slow and deep, like his lungs were listening. "You're not just sightseeing, are you?" There was a scar down his right foreleg, a smooth indentation under the fur where a harness used to sit. Tango had retired a year ago. Nina had taken him in after his handler, her best friend, died in a landslide during an op they were both on. Tango had barely survived. Nina still had the limp. He stood then, just a little. Not to confront, but to reposition. One step forward and he sat again, closer to the door, still watching. Nina turned and faced the building. Its main entrance was chained shut, rusted links hanging like dead vines across the frame. The snow was undisturbed, no footprints, but something about it itched at the base of her spine. She stepped onto the crumbling sidewalk, hand brushing the pepper spray clipped to her belt. "Tango," she called softly. "Come." He didn't. Instead, he let out a low, quiet hum. Not a growl, not fear. It was the sound he used in the field when he picked up a trail and needed her to pay attention. Nina's pulse kicked up a notch. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the doorframe, the broken window panes, the twisted chain-link fence half swallowed by brush. Silence. Then a sound. Barely audible. A hollow, rhythmic thump. Not like something falling, like something tapping. Slow, repeating. Nina stepped closer. Tango stood now, his body angled, blocking the doorway with quiet urgency. The sound stopped. A shiver ran up her spine. She reached into her jacket, unclipped her flashlight, and stepped toward the door. "You're serious about this?" she said to Tango without looking. He didn't respond. She pressed a gloved hand to the steel. Cold, expected, but the air around it, warmer than it should have been. The metal wasn't freezing. It was barely even cool. What the hell? Behind her, Tango let out a short, sharp bark, a single warning. She spun, flashlight beam catching on his eyes. He'd stepped off to the side, nose pointed at the edge of the building where the wall met the ground. Snow drifted gently against the base, but Tango's attention had shifted. Locked again, this time on a small metal grate low to the ground, almost completely obscured by overgrowth. Nina moved fast, heart pounding now. She crouched beside the grate, brushed snow and dead leaves aside. It was welded shut, but the seal had been tampered with. Fresh scrapes in the rust, like someone had tried to pry it open from the inside. She put her ear to it. Silence. Then, barely, a sound, a whisper, a breath. She flinched back, heart hammering. "Tango," she whispered, breath fogging in the air. "I need to call this in." She backed away, hand trembling slightly as she keyed her radio, but Tango wasn't listening anymore. He turned suddenly and took off, silent and swift, disappearing behind the side of the factory like he knew something she didn't. "Tango!" she shouted, slipping as she gave chase. She rounded the corner just in time to see him standing, rigid, before another door, this one smaller, industrial. A rusted padlock hung from it, but it had clearly been used recently. Tracks in the snow, tire prints, boot prints, all fresh. Then Nina saw it, a smear on the handle. Red, not rust. Blood. Tango stared at it, then looked at her, and for the first time since she'd found him that morning, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear, not panic, permission. He was asking her to move. Her hands moved automatically. Radio, backup, coordinates, breath. And still, he didn't bark. He just stared. And Nina, without knowing exactly why, stared with him. Because whatever was behind that door, Tango already knew it wasn't empty. And he wasn't leaving, not until someone listened. Not until someone opened it. The second morning, Tango was already there when Nina pulled up. Same spot, same posture. That rusted door of the Harrow Mill paper factory, receiving the full weight of his stare like it might crack under the pressure. Nina stepped out of her cruiser, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. Her breath curled into the icy air as she walked toward him. "You're not done, are you?" Tango didn't move. The fresh dusting of snow on the steps remained untouched except for his paw prints, which formed a perfect circle around where he'd sat for what looked like hours. She crouched next to him, scanned his face. The gray around his muzzle was a little more pronounced in the morning light, but his eyes, they hadn't aged a day, still sharp, still listening. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's go over it again." She circled the factory with him, flashlight in hand. Nothing new, no signs of forced entry, no obvious movement inside. Just the slow creak of wind against broken metal and the occasional moan of old pipes buried beneath the building's skin. But Tango's behavior was different, focused, intent, like the job had never ended. No barking, no chasing, just a dog doing what he was born to do. Back at the precinct later that morning, Nina stood in front of Sergeant Rourke's desk, arms crossed, report in hand. "He's locked on to something," she said. Rourke leaned back, skeptical as always. "Locked on to what? A squirrel with a death wish." "He's not sniffing for lunch," Nina shot back. "He's alerting, repeatedly, at the same place, same posture, same time of day." "You've had him what? 6 months? 7. He's a retired military K9. These dogs develop habits, ghost alerts, muscle memory. You put him near enough concrete and rust, and sure, he's going to get twitchy." "It's not that." Rourke looked up from his screen. "Alvarez, I know you want to believe he's found something, and maybe once he could have, but we both know retirement changes these dogs. Like it changes us. You said it yourself. He barely reacts to traffic anymore. Could be he's just bored." Nina set the report down a little harder than necessary. "There's something at that factory," she said, her voice quieter. "I don't know what yet, but it's not nothing." Rourke sighed. "Look, I'll swing a patrol car by Harrow Mill during third shift, but unless you've got evidence, something more than your dog's mood, I can't open an investigation." Her jaw clenched. "It's not a mood, it's behavior." He softened slightly. "I'm not saying ignore it, just don't go making ghosts where there aren't any. You've been through a lot, Nina. More than most." And there it was. The drop, the canyon collapse, the weeks in recovery, the limp she still carried in her left leg, the scars, the nightmares she never admitted to. They all hung in the air like unspoken doubt. "I'm fine," she said flatly. "I'm not questioning your sanity," Rourke added. "But trauma rewires instinct. You of all people should know that. Just don't let old wounds make new assumptions." Nina left without another word. That evening, she didn't head home. Instead, she parked 2 blocks away from Harrow Mill and walked the rest of the distance under a sky streaked with gray and fading blue. Tango trailed beside her, silent, tail low, but steady. The factory looked like it always had, dead. But when they rounded the back corner again, the air shifted. She felt it before she heard it. Warmth against her ankle. Impossible. The snow hadn't melted, but the air, just near the foundation, was warmer, like a vent was bleeding heat from inside. Tango stopped, nose pointed toward a narrow grate set low into the brick wall, almost fully hidden by frost and dead ivy. He growled. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. Nina knelt and touched the grate. Warm. She yanked off her glove and pressed her bare palm to the metal. Still warm. Her breath caught. The factory had no power. The city had cut utilities 15 years ago. No one had been authorized to reopen it since. Then where the hell was the heat coming from? She glanced at Tango. He was sitting again, staring, still as stone. She rose, scanned the alley. No movement, no tire tracks in the snow, no boot prints, just quiet. The kind of quiet that made your skin itch. That night, Nina brought it up to Callie Rivers over takeout in the squad room. The only other female officer in Crescent Falls PD, Callie had always been her closest ally. No judgments, just facts. "You think someone's inside?" Callie asked between bites of cold lo mein. "I don't know," Nina replied. "But Tango does." Callie set down her fork. "Rourke's not going to back you up without evidence. I get that, but I also know that dog better than anyone. He doesn't fixate unless it matters." Callie was quiet for a moment. "Maybe it's just habit. He misses working. Could be he needs structure and his brain is trying to invent one. You sound like Rourke. Maybe he's not entirely wrong." Nina leaned back in her chair. Her hands itched, not from nerves, from stillness. She'd spent years on edge, trusting instinct over intel. Dogs didn't lie, especially not Tango. "He's trying to tell me something," she whispered. "Then what are you going to do?" Callie asked. "Listen." The next morning, Nina was up before the sun. Tango sat by the door, waiting, not wagging his tail, not excited, just ready. They parked outside the factory just as the sky began to lighten. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. Tango hopped out before she even turned the engine off, trotted directly to the grate again, and sat. Same spot, same posture, same stare. She followed, knees bending slow as she crouched beside him. "Talk to me," she said, running her hand along the edge of the metal. This time, she heard it. Not a tap, not a breath, a whisper. She jerked back, heart slamming into her ribs. Someone was under there, and they weren't alone. Crescent Falls slept heavy under a midnight sky. Not even the street lamps hummed. It was the kind of quiet that didn't just settle. It pressed. Nina Alvarez parked her truck 3 blocks away from the Harrow Mill factory and killed the lights. Tango sat beside her in the passenger seat, upright, alert, as if he'd known before she did that they weren't going home tonight. She didn't leash him. He didn't need it. The walk was short. Snow crunched under her boots, soft and sharp. She kept to the shadows, not because she feared being seen, but because something about this place didn't deserve to be approached loudly. Tango moved beside her like smoke, his paws silent even on the frozen ground. When they reached the edge of the factory, he broke away. Not running, not frantic. Deliberate. He padded around the back corner to the same vent they'd stood at that morning, then past it. Nina followed. He stopped at a patch of ground just beside the collapsed loading dock. Snow was piled high, untouched by wind or boot, until Tango nosed it once, then began digging. She dropped to her knees beside him. Cold bit into her jeans. Tango's paws kicked snow in steady rhythm, revealing something just beneath the drift. Metal. Scratched, dented, but unmistakably a door. Low and flat, like an old storm cellar or access hatch. It shouldn't have been there. Nina pulled off her glove and pressed her palm to the steel. Warm. Her breath caught in her throat. In a Minnesota winter, where metal should bite your skin, this one didn't. Tango sat again, his body tense but focused, waiting. She leaned closer, ear just inches from the door. At first, nothing, then a clank, a faint scrape, like metal brushing against metal, and then a sound she hadn't expected, a sob, muffled, choked, barely audible. She pulled back, heart slamming into her chest. Someone was in there. She scanned the area, instincts firing. No recent vehicle tracks, no camera, no sign of movement, but someone had to have been using that hatch. The warmth, the noise, it wasn't imagined. She turned to Tango. He hadn't moved. His ears were forward, his eyes pinned to the hatch like it might open at any second. "What the hell is this place?" She didn't expect an answer, but Tango let out a low breath, almost like a sigh, the kind he used to make when they were close to something in the field. Not done yet. Nina stood and pulled out her phone. No signal. Typical. She stared at the hatch. No lock, but it had been bolted from the inside. Whoever was in there didn't want out, or wasn't allowed to leave. The air shifted again. That strange warmth that didn't make sense. She remembered the blueprints she'd seen once, back when she took over patrol routes. The Harrow Mill factory had no sub-basement on file, just ground-level loading zones and sealed production rooms, but this door said otherwise. Tango stood and nudged her leg. She looked down. "Yeah," she whispered, "I feel it too." They circled the building again, windows boarded. No light, but the faintest flicker near the northern wall. A single glow, like the halo of a bulb too weak to reach the glass. She followed it. Tango trailed behind. Body low, silent. They reached the wall. Nothing but brick and cold. Until her flashlight caught it. A seam. A hidden panel, painted to match the brick. Camouflaged almost perfectly. She reached up and pressed a hand against it. It moved. Only slightly, but enough to reveal what it was. A secondary access point. Industrial, meant for deliveries or waste disposal. Long forgotten. Maybe. Nina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. She backed away. This wasn't just an abandoned building. It was active, maintained, quiet for a reason. Tango stood behind her, tail low, head high. She knew that look. He was ready. They returned to the hatch. Nina crouched again, listening. Another sob. This one closer. She wanted to tear the door open, climb in and drag whoever was down there into the night air. But she couldn't. Not without backup. Not without a warrant. But also, not without a reason. And right now, she had one. She pulled out her notebook and started writing. Timestamps, temperature, Tango's repeated alerts, the noises, the warmth. Then she paused. She pulled out her old tactical flashlight, one she hadn't used since she left the SAR unit. It had a long beam and a silent strobe function. She clicked it on. The beam hit Tango's face. His eyes didn't flinch. He sat taller. A minute passed, then another, and then a whisper from behind the hatch. "Help, please." A child's voice. Shaking. Real. Nina froze. She looked at Tango. He was standing now, every muscle in his body tensed but steady. No growl, no bark, just certainty. She pressed her hand to the hatch one more time. Still warm, still breathing. So was she. But whatever lived beneath that factory, whatever was buried down there with bolts and silence, it wasn't going to stay hidden much longer. And Tango wasn't going to let it. Nina stood in Sergeant Rourke's office with snow still melting on her boots. Her hands were clenched around her field notebook, pages damp from her breath in the night air. "There's someone under that factory," she said. "More than one, maybe. I heard them. I'm not guessing." Rourke didn't look up right away. He stayed leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest like he'd heard this speech before, just with different names. "And you're sure of that because your retired dog sat still in the snow?" She blinked. "Number, I'm sure, because I heard a voice. A kid. Saying, 'Help me.' I also felt heat radiating off a sealed hatch in below-freezing weather, and Tango led me straight to it." "Any recordings?" "It was too faint, but you know damn well I wouldn't be in here wasting time if it wasn't real." Rourke sighed, shifted forward and rubbed his hands over his face. "Alvarez, listen, I don't think you're crazy. I know you've seen things most of us haven't, but we can't act on feelings. We need evidence, hard evidence. You think I imagined a hatch? A voice? I think trauma lingers. Think you and Tango are both wired for adrenaline, and when you're not getting it anymore, your brain starts looking for ghosts." Her mouth opened, then shut again. The words hung like static between them. "You're saying I made it up." "I'm saying, be careful not to chase things that aren't there. I've seen good officers burn out that way, and I've seen dogs, smart, trained, decorated, fixate on places because of old muscle memory. Sometimes they look like they know something and all they're doing is remembering. Tango doesn't remember. He reacts." Rourke stood. "We'll add a note to patrol, mark the building for periodic checks, but unless you can get eyes on a victim or threat, I can't sign off on a warrant. You know how this works." "Yeah," Nina said flatly. "I do." She left the office with her jaw tight and her pulse thumping in her ears. Back in the squad room, Officer Callie Rivers looked up from her desk, concern already written across her face. "How'd it go?" she asked, standing. Nina tossed her notebook onto the table and sank into the chair across from her. "They think I'm spinning shadows. Tango's just nostalgic. I'm just unstable." Callie sat down across from her. "You've been different since you came back." "Don't start." "I'm not judging," Callie said quickly. "You're sharper than most of us on a good day, but after the canyon, after everything, it's like you never landed all the way. Like part of you stayed out there." Nina looked away, jaw set. "You think I'm seeing things too?" she asked. "I think," Callie said carefully, "you and Tango have been through hell, and maybe your instincts are still tuned to that frequency. Maybe that's why you're hearing things no one else can. I didn't imagine a warm hatch in a snowstorm. I'm not saying you did." "Then say what you mean." Callie hesitated. "I think maybe. It's time you let yourself rest. Just a little." There it was, the gentle version of what Rourke said. Softer, but just as sharp. "I'm not tired," Nina said. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Nina stood. "Sleep doesn't fix what I saw, or what I heard." Callie reached for her arm but didn't touch her. "I'm on your side." Nina gave a bitter smile. "I'm not sure there are sides anymore." She left the station without another word. Back at home, the house was dark. She didn't turn on the lights, just dropped her keys, kicked off her boots, and walked into the living room where Tango usually slept on the rug near the fireplace. Empty. She called for him once. Nothing. Checked the kitchen, bedroom, backyard. No sound, no paw prints in the snow. She stood in the doorway, breath catching in her throat. "Tango," she called again. Still nothing. She grabbed her coat and flashlight and hit the streets. Block after block, she checked their usual routes. Corner, every trail, the park, the gas station, even the diner where he sometimes waited for scraps. Gone. Panic rose slow and thick in her chest. Not the kind that shouted, the kind that squeezed. She drove to Harrow Mill, and there he was, not on the front steps, not at the side grate, but standing in the alley by the loading dock, eyes locked on the ground. She pulled up fast, jumped out, heart hammering. "Tango!" He didn't move. She ran to him, slipped slightly on the frost-covered concrete, and dropped to her knees beside him. "What are you doing out here? You scared me half to death." Still no reaction. His body was stiff, staring not just at the wall, but at something deeper, something she couldn't see. She followed his gaze, and then she heard it. A different sound this time. Not a sob, not a whisper, a scrape. Metal, slow and methodical, like someone dragging something across a concrete floor beneath her feet. Nina's breath caught. This wasn't in her head. It was real, still happening. She looked at Tango, who finally turned his head, just slightly to meet her eyes. Not frantic, not confused, resolute. And in that second, she realized something terrifying. He didn't come home because he thought she wouldn't come back, because she didn't believe him. Now he was here again, watching the place alone, waiting for her to finally follow. By the time Nina reached the back lot of Harrow Mill, the morning sun had barely started to rise. The sky was still a dull, heavy gray, and the wind rolled in sharp off the river, slicing through her coat as she stepped out of her truck. Tango was already there. Not sitting like before, not watching the main door or the side grate. This time he stood stiff and silent in the far corner of the property, just beyond the old loading ramp, facing a low patch of overgrown earth near the base of the factory wall. Nina's boots crunched over frozen ground as she moved toward him. "Tango," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. His body was rigid, tail down, ears pinned forward with laser focus. A single paw lifted and hovered just above the ground, his signal for wait. Not a pause, a warning. She stopped beside him and followed his gaze. The snow in front of the hatch had been disturbed, not from wind, not from animals. Tracks, multiple sets, boot prints, light like a child's, mixed in with deeper impressions, heavier ones, like someone had been dragging something. The earth around the hatch had been roughly scraped. The metal door was almost fully exposed now, the snow around it thrown aside in messy arcs. Someone had been here. Recently. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She dropped to her knees, brushed snow off the edge of the hatch with her glove, then yanked it off and pressed her bare hand to the steel. Warm. Still warm. She leaned in, pressing her ear to the metal. Silence. Then, movement. A scuff. A shuffle. The scrape of something hard against concrete. Then, clear as day, a sob, a young voice, broken, wet, real. Nina jerked back, breath caught in her throat. She turned to Tango. He sat beside her now, completely still. No barking, no growling, just certainty. Nina reached for her radio, then stopped. Think. She had tracks, heat, audible voice, and a retired military K9 signaling a live find. She keyed the mic. "This is Officer Nina Alvarez. I need immediate backup at the rear lot of Harrow Mill factory. Coordinates coming, possible entrapment, audible contact made with a subject beneath ground level. Repeat, contact confirmed." The dispatcher hesitated. "Copy that, Officer Alvarez." "Confirming. Do you have visual?" "Negative. Audio only. Human voice. Sounds juvenile, likely non-consensual confinement." "Backup en route. ETA 7 minutes." Nina clicked the radio off, scanned the area again. She had minutes, not much else. She crouched again, ear pressed tight to the hatch. She counted slowly, tried to separate her own breath from the sounds below. Then, another voice. Higher. Frightened. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew the tone. They were not alone down there. She stood quickly and moved to the snowbank nearby. Her boots hit packed ice. She slipped, caught herself. Tango followed, nose low to the ground, tracking. She watched him sniff the line of footprints, then pause at a section of scraped dirt. He stood above it, then looked back at her. Another signal. This time he lowered himself into a tight crouch, chest to the ground, nose pointed at the base of the wall. She knelt beside him. There, hidden beneath a broken pallet and a curtain of dead ivy, was another hatch. Smaller, old, almost completely buried. Nina dragged the wood away, tearing her gloves on splinters. Tango stayed beside her, unmoving. As she cleared the last of the snow, she reached for the handle. Rusted, stiff, but intact. When her fingers closed around it, she paused. Heat again. Slight but unmistakable. Radiating from below. She put her head down. This time she didn't just hear a voice. She heard a full cry. A plea. Please. Please help. Sharp. Close. Like the person was just a few feet beneath her, and then another voice, lower, panicked. She's gonna hear us. The first voice cracked into a whisper. She's real. I told you she was real. Nina backed away like she'd been struck. She looked at Tango. His eyes were on her now, not the door. No hesitation. No second guess. He had brought her here because he knew. Because someone had to, and because no one else had listened. Not yet. But now they would. Because this time, the proof wasn't just in her head. It was in the snow. It was under the ground, and it was still breathing. The sound of the bolt cutters snapping through the rusted chain was louder than Nina expected. It cracked through the still morning air like a gunshot. Sergeant Rourke flinched as the padlock dropped to the frozen ground and bounced once before settling into the snow. Jesus, he muttered, stepping back. Steam curled up from the seams of the hatch as Nina reached for the handle. The steel still pulsed with unnatural warmth, despite the sub-zero wind ripping through the factory yard. Tango stood just behind her, body stiff, nose angled slightly toward the opening like he already knew what was coming. You sure you want to go first? Rourke asked. Nina didn't answer. She just opened the door. A wave of heat rolled up, thick and sour. Sweat, mildew, rust, and something else. Something deeper. Tangled in the air like the scent of fear clinging to fabric. She clicked on her flashlight. The beam cut through the steam and found a narrow staircase made of poured concrete, worn smooth by years of use. Moss clung to the corners. A single bare bulb flickered somewhere below. Behind her, Rourke keyed his radio. We've breached the hatch. Requesting med units and backup. Potential hostage situation. Dispatch crackled confirmation. Nina took the first step. It groaned under her weight. Tango followed without hesitation, his paws making no sound on the slick concrete. Rourke came behind, flashlight scanning the walls. You weren't kidding about the heat, he muttered. No HVAC system would still be running here, Nina said. Not legally. The staircase turned hard left after a dozen steps. The walls closed in tighter. Then, without warning, the passage opened into a low-ceilinged space. They froze. The flashlight caught the glint of eyes. Dozens. A cluster of girls, huddled together in blankets, hospital scrubs, worn flannel. Thin limbs, pale faces, matted hair. Some stared into the light, others flinched and shrank back into the corners. They weren't screaming. They weren't even speaking. Just watching with the wide, vacant eyes of people who had stopped expecting rescue. Nina lowered her voice. We're here to help. You're safe now. A girl near the front stood slowly, no older than 14. She had dark circles under her eyes and a healing split lip. She opened her mouth, tried to speak, then closed it again. Nina stepped forward. "It's okay," she said gently. "You're not alone." The girl's lips trembled. "The dog," she whispered. Nina froze. "We heard him," the girl said. "Every morning. We thought maybe he was a dream, but we prayed anyway. We prayed he was real." Tango stepped forward, slow and steady. He didn't sniff. He didn't bark. He just moved through the room like he had done 1,000 times before. Calm, deliberate, assessing. One of the girls reached out. Tango paused, let her fingers brush his shoulder. She sobbed quietly. Nina moved down the line, counting. 21, 23, then 25. The youngest looked about 11, the oldest maybe mid-20s. Some could barely stand. A few clung to each other like driftwood. Rourke was behind her, silent, face pale. "This is," he began, but couldn't finish. "This is why Tango didn't stop watching the factory," Nina said. Rourke keyed his radio again. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Rourke. Confirmed victims. 25 females, ages unknown, alive. Repeat, alive. Multiple requiring immediate medical attention. Requesting all available EMS to the Harrow Mill site. We need blankets, stretchers, trauma kits." "Copy," dispatch answered. Nina crouched beside one of the older girls. "Is anyone else down here?" The girl shook her head. "They took some a few days ago, said they were moving them. I don't know where." "Did they say anything? Names? Places?" "They didn't talk to us," she said. "Not unless they were angry." Tango circled the room again, pausing at a small curtain in the back, fashioned from bed sheets and an old shelving unit. He stopped, sniffed, then looked back at Nina. She crossed quickly. Behind the curtain, another girl, hiding, knees pulled to her chest, face buried in her arms. She was shaking. Nina knelt down. "You're safe," she said gently. "I'm Officer Alvarez. This is Tango. We're getting you out of here." The girl looked up slowly. Her face was blotched with old bruises, but her eyes were clear. "You came," she whispered. "We came," Nina said. The girl's eyes flicked to Tango. "He found us first." "Yes," Nina said. "He did." Outside, sirens were starting to grow louder. Inside, silence had begun to crack. The girls were crying, quietly, but not from fear, from release. One girl leaned her head on another's shoulder. Another held Tango's fur like it was the only solid thing in the world. Rourke stood by the stairs, eyes rimmed red, voice low. "We'll need statements, reports, but not now." Nina looked at the room one last time before climbing the stairs to guide the paramedics in. This was far from over, but it had begun. And all because one dog refused to look away. The underground room filled quickly with motion, controlled, quiet, deliberate. Paramedics moved with urgency, but not chaos, their voices calm as they handed out thermal blankets, checked pulses, offered soft words and clean water. Rourke had brought in 2 more patrol units and an evidence tech, who now stood by the base of the stairs, eyes wide, trying to process the scale of what they had walked into. Nina hovered near the middle of the room, scanning every face, every shadow. She wasn't counting anymore. She was watching, listening, trying to see what hadn't yet been said. The girls were responsive, but guarded. Trauma clung to them like smoke, thick, invisible, and hard to clear. She moved toward a low shelf pressed against one of the concrete walls, where a milk crate overflowed with random belongings. Old sweaters, plastic hairbrushes, snack wrappers, and a few crumpled pieces of paper. One was a receipt from a gas station 3 towns over, time-stamped less than 2 weeks ago. Another, a candy wrapper printed in Spanish with a sticker labeled from Arkansas. Nina handed them to the tech. "Bag these. We need origin points." He nodded without speaking. Tango was still working. He moved slowly around the perimeter, nose low, tail neutral, scanning every scent, every shift in the air. He paused near a corner behind an overturned cot, sniffed, then turned and made a low, short woof, the kind of alert he used when he wasn't sure if something was alive but still important. Nina crossed to him. He was staring at a collapsed storage rack, half draped in blankets. Behind it, she saw the edge of fabric, a curtain or maybe a partition made from bed sheets. It didn't match the rest of the space. This one hadn't been disturbed. "Tango, stay," she said gently. She stepped forward, pulling the curtain aside. Behind it, in the narrow space between the wall and a metal cabinet, was a girl. Curled tight, arms over her head, pressed into the shadows like she was trying to disappear. Her hair was matted and her clothes hung off her like they'd once belonged to someone else. Her eyes, when they finally opened, were huge and unblinking, locked on Nina with silent panic. Nina knelt. "It's okay," she said. "You're safe now. I'm Officer Alvarez. You're not alone anymore." The girl didn't move, didn't blink, until Tango stepped forward, quiet as breath, and sat just beside Nina. He didn't inch closer, didn't sniff. He just looked at the girl with that same unwavering stare he had used on the factory door. Her breathing hitched, then, like a dam cracking, she burst into sobs. Nina reached out slowly, palm open. The girl didn't take it. But she didn't pull away either. Behind them, Rourke's voice echoed gently, asking for additional stretchers, requesting victim advocates, coordinating with state investigators. The girl whispered something. Nina leaned closer. "Can you say that again?" She left me here." "Who?" "The one with the clipboard. She said I wasn't on the list anymore, that someone else would come later." Nina's stomach turned. "What list?" The girl shook her head. "I don't know, but she had names. Checked them off. Said there were stops. Different places." Nina stood quickly and called to the tech. "I need everything with writing on it. Bags, wrappers, notebooks, boxes. Anything. Now." They gathered them on a plastic tarp. As Nina sifted through the debris, something stuck out. A tattered journal, half burned on the edges, but legible. Inside were names. Dozens. Some first names only, others with numbers. Most were crossed out. Each was paired with 3-letter codes, abbreviations for towns, states, sometimes just highway mile markers. She flipped the page. More names. And near the bottom, one not yet crossed out. Eve, CF20. Next. She turned the page. Nothing more. She passed it to Rourke. "This isn't just a holding site," she said. "It's part of a route. System. They're moving them." Rourke's jaw clenched. "We're calling in federal." They need to know this wasn't improvised. This was organized, structured, planned. Tango walked over to the girl still huddled by the wall. He lay down in front of her, facing outward, body relaxed but watchful. A silent barrier. A promise. The girl reached a trembling hand and touched his fur. Nina watched them both, something tightening in her chest. He hadn't missed her. He hadn't missed anyone. Because Tango didn't just search. He stayed. Until everyone was found. The arrest came quietly. No sirens. No foot chase. Just a silent takedown at dawn. Detectives from the Joint Task Force had traced vehicle movement from a traffic cam near the outskirts of Heverly to a rundown industrial warehouse on the edge of town. The man they found inside, dusty boots, a burner phone, a face that didn't make headlines, wasn't on any known offender lists. No aliases, no priors, just a long scar behind one ear and a complete refusal to speak. He went without a fight. Rourke watched through the two-way glass as the man sat handcuffed in the interview room, staring straight ahead like the walls themselves might eventually blink first. They'd run his prints, combed his belongings, but found nothing directly linking him to the girls. Except the footage. Recovered from an old DVR system inside the shuttered factory, the camera feeds had mostly degraded, but a few frames remained intact, and in them someone else appeared. Not the man in custody, not a trafficker or known associate. A different figure entirely. Leaner, clean-cut, clothes too neat for the setting. And though the footage was grainy, the profile was unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up in Crescent County. Pastor Elijah Lindell. Rourke stood frozen when the frame locked on his face. "No way," he muttered under his breath. Nina leaned closer to the monitor, watching the man wheel a small cart of food toward the rear hatch, the same one Tango had found. She looked at Rourke. "How well do you know him?" "Well enough to have let him baptize my nephew last fall," he said flatly. A few hours later, they brought him in. He walked into the station under his own power, requested a glass of water, and sat down in the chair across from Nina like he had nothing to hide. "I don't know what you think you saw," he said, voice calm, soft with that practiced Sunday rhythm. "We saw you," Nina said. "On camera, inside that building." Lindell looked down at his hands, laced gently in front of him like he was praying. "I didn't hurt them," he said. "I never laid a finger." "That's not what we asked." He didn't answer right away, just sat in silence as Tango padded quietly into the room and lay beside Nina's chair. The pastor's eyes flicked down to the dog and then back up. "I brought food, water. I didn't know. At first, I didn't know what it was." Rourke stood in the corner, arms crossed. "You didn't know what was behind a padlocked hatch?" "I thought it was a shelter, a home for runaways. That's what I was told." "By who?" Lindell hesitated, then closed his eyes for a moment like steadying something brittle inside. "They showed me a picture of my daughter," he said. "Said she was studying abroad. But then, she was in a room, bound. I don't know where, I don't know when, just that if I stopped delivering, she'd vanish." Nina's jaw tightened. "So you kept delivering?" "I thought I could keep them alive," he said, voice cracking. "If I stopped, they'd starve." "And you never came to the police?" "You think they wouldn't have killed her the moment I did?" Tango let out a soft, low whine. Lindell flinched. "I didn't know there were that many," he added. "At first, it was just 2 or 3. Then the numbers grew. But by then, they had every detail about my family. I couldn't breathe without them knowing." Rourke stepped forward. "So you chose to stay quiet, to protect one by risking 25. "I chose not to be the reason they died," Lindell said. "But maybe I was anyway." Silence hung in the room like a verdict. Nina didn't let herself feel sympathy. Not yet. Not until she had more than a confession painted with just enough guilt to pass as remorse. "Where's your daughter now?" "I don't know," he whispered. "They said she'd be free if I kept quiet until spring." "And you believed them?" "I had to." Rourke sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It wasn't clean. It never was. The lines had blurred the moment they'd opened that hatch. And now they weren't dealing with monsters in masks. They were dealing with men in pulpits. That evening, Nina stood alone in the quiet of the locker room, watching the rain tick against the frosted window. Tango sat at her feet, ears up, alert but calm. "There's more," she said aloud, voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head. "We found a crack, but the wall's still standing." Tango didn't move. He didn't need to, because for the first time since this began, Nina no longer felt alone in knowing what came next. And somewhere out there, she knew, more girls were waiting for the sound of a dog barking at dawn. The first FBI vehicle rolled in too heavily just after dawn, headlights cutting through the wet mist like scalpels. It was no longer just a local case. The hatch behind the plant had blown open more than a door. It had cracked a national wound. Agent Michelle Carraway stepped out of the lead Suburban, trench coat flapping in the wind, and barely glanced at the press barricades already forming. Her eyes went straight to Nina and the German shepherd sitting beside her cruiser. "You're Nina Alvarez?" she asked. Nina nodded. "And this is Tango." The agent's voice held no trace of condescension, only curiosity, respect even. Tango lifted his head, eyes locking with hers like he understood he was being assessed. Then he stood. Not for attention, not for show, but because he sensed something had shifted, something bigger than before. "We've read your reports," Carraway said. "We need both of you." Just like that, they were drafted into a special joint task force. No more county lines, no more wait and see. Tango wasn't just a local asset anymore. He was evidence with a heartbeat. Proof that sometimes the quietest presence carries the sharpest signal. By the end of the week, Nina found herself in an abandoned rail yard 2 counties over. Snow clung to the cracked concrete. Rusted train cars loomed like ghosts. Tango paced beside her, nose twitching, his body tense but not alarmed. "Second drop site," Carraway said behind her, pointing to a battered shipping container. The team had triangulated locations based on fuel receipts, tower pings, and one name whispered by a terrified girl from the plant. But it wasn't enough. They needed a thread. Something organic. Something that could smell what silence tried to bury. Tango stopped at a patch of slush near the container's rear axle and sat. Still. Focused. Nina knelt beside him. There, barely visible against the mud, were scratch marks, like fingers had clawed at the metal from the inside. They pried open the container with crowbars. It was empty, cold, but not untouched. Carraway knelt to inspect the walls. These girls, they were moved, staged, not random. She looked at Tango, and he found the echo. Nina didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In the days that followed, the unit mapped more than 24 possible sites, old silos, forgotten cellars, false floor motels. Each time, Tango led them closer, like his paws were retracing a hidden route no GPS could find. Word spread, not just within law enforcement circles, but among survivors. One by one, names became people, shadows became voices, and Tango. Tango became something more than just a dog. He became memory, anchor, hope. Back at the Haverly safe house, Nina found the smallest of the rescued girls, the one who had trembled behind the curtain, sitting cross-legged on a floor mat, watching Tango with wide, almost disbelieving eyes. Her name was Alina, 7 years old, Ukrainian-American, missing for 6 months. When she saw Nina enter, she didn't speak at first, just reached out slowly, wrapping her small arms around Tango's neck. Nina crouched beside her. "Hey, sweetheart, how you feeling?" Alina didn't answer right away. She just buried her face into Tango's thick coat, whispering something that barely made it past her breath. Nina leaned in. "I didn't dream it. Did I?" Alina whispered. "The dog really came." Tango didn't move, just nuzzled closer, like his entire job in that moment was to be real. Nina swallowed hard. "No, baby," she said softly. "You didn't dream him. He's here." Alina tightened her hold. "Then maybe the other girls will believe me." And Nina realized that was what mattered most now. Not just finding the guilty, but making sure every one of the forgotten knew they were never invisible again. Each footprint Tango left behind was no longer a search. It was a promise. It started with one card, a small, hand-cut rectangle taped to the edge of the Crescent Falls Town Hall steps. Glitter smudged at the corners, marker letters written in a child's crooked hand. "Thank you, Tango. You found me." No name. No return address. Just that. By noon, there were 3 more. By evening, the steps were full. They came quietly, those who had been rescued, those who had waited, and those who had loved and lost. There were no cameras, no speeches blaring through a microphone, no politicians, just a line of candles flickering in the wind and a stillness that felt sacred. The survivors didn't bring flowers. They brought dog treats, tennis balls, a child's drawing with a shepherd's ears too big and a tail that looked like a lightning bolt. A woman in her 30s placed a collar on the steps, then touched it once before walking away. No one needed to ask what it meant. Inside the town hall, Nina stood at the back of the room, Tango by her side. His coat was still thick with winter, his stance alert but calm. He scanned the crowd, not for threats, but in the way only a working dog could. Noting. Understanding. Captain Rourke leaned in, his voice low. "You sure you want to speak?" Nina didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the window, where a teenage girl was kneeling on the lawn, gently brushing dirt off a small bronze paw print plaque someone had laid near the flagpole. Finally, Nina stepped forward. There was no podium, just her voice. "I've been a K9 handler for 7 years," she began. "In that time, I've seen dogs chase suspects, take down armed men, sniff out explosives, protect lives. And still, I thought I understood what they were." She looked down at Tango, who sat without command. "I didn't." She paused. Tango didn't chase down the guy behind that hatch. He didn't fight anyone. He didn't bite, didn't bark. He just stayed, day after day, in front of that door, in the freezing cold. He didn't know who was behind it. He just knew someone needed help, and he stayed. The room was silent. Not stiff. Just holding breath. Nina's voice softened. "Some heroes don't show up with sirens or medals. They don't wait for permission. They don't need to be seen. Some of them, they just stay." Someone in the back sniffled. Then applause. Quiet, respectful, but steady. The kind that doesn't demand attention but offers it freely. After the crowd thinned out, Nina found herself standing by the table near the doors. People had started writing notes, little tags with names. Max, 2003 to 2017, waited by the door every night until Dad came home. Roxy, pulled my sister out of the river. Bruno, found me when no one else could. Each name told a story. Each paw print left a legacy. A young girl tugged at Nina's sleeve. "Can I hug him?" Tango tilted his head, then stepped closer. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered something only he heard. As the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky with quiet amber, Nina clipped Tango's leash back on, but he didn't move to leave. He sat once more, right in front of the growing shrine on the steps, tail curled neatly around his feet, chest proud, ears forward. She didn't rush him. He had earned the right to stay. And as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and frost and something older, something sacred, Nina took a deep breath and turned to the small crowd still lingering. "Do you have a story of a dog who stayed?" she asked, voice steady. "Drop their name below. Let's honor them together. Because some heroes don't need to speak. They just stay. If this story touched you, help us keep these stories alive. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel and share your dog's legacy in the comments. They deserve to be remembered. Always.